James, welcome to the Live and Learn podcast.
Happy to be here.
Thank you for coming down to London and you survived the train okay.
Yes.
Really appreciate your time. This is an episode I'm really keen to get your expertise on making learning stick, which is something a lot of people can struggle with.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also really excited to have you on the podcast because you're someone in class is a really good friend as well, so I think we'll have lots of good fun. What would be the best way to describe your L&D background, people who are listening for the first time? Because I don't think it does it justice, just your job title, does it? You've been in L&D 30 years now, you were saying this before.
Yeah, around 30 years.
Yeah. Do you want to just talk us through the L&D journey?
Yeah, I won't take this whole podcast talk because I could. But started as a trainer working for HSBC, and we've had a great grounding from them. And my career's kind of moved through lots of different disciplines in L&D, so commercial related development, leadership development, and supporting lots of different stakeholders. It's also took me into consulting twice, so working out with lots of different organisations. But ultimately, it's all been around how do we deliver a result. So my interest is it's almost weirdly less about the learning and more about the outcome.
Yeah.
And that's always been a feature all the way through. So, at the minute in my current employment, it's very much around development and culture, which is an interesting connection between the two. Lots of organisations, HSBC, E.ON, O2, around the time that they became O2.
Yep.
I was with Northern Foods before Two Sisters bought them out. So lots of different industries. So seen and done quite a lot of different things.
You're very well qualified to talk about this then.
We'll see.
And I guess making learning stick, that's the kind of headline for this episode.
Yeah.
It's something, learning quite often isn't implemented or done well. Is that a fair thing to kind of throw out in lots of companies?
It can be, yeah.
Some people kind of get this wrong or not sure where to start. Why do you think that people struggle with this historically, making it actually stick?
I think one of the main challenges is around, actually, when you step back from it, is understanding learning's present constantly. And when organisations or teams focusing on very specific things, if they don't get the framing of it right, if they don't get the connection to people's day job or their activity, and if they don't create an environment that they can use and apply and be supported implementing those things very quickly, it just disappears. But I think it's that, for me, it's around learning culture versus a piece of learning that's being implemented. And the bigger conversation for me is around the broader environment. Is there a culture of learning? Because if there is, any single project or initiative is more likely to stick because the conditions are right.
And where would you start with that? Because I think we have lots of clients or people we speak to maybe not sure where to start with learning culture, especially if it's C-suite or from above. Sometimes that can be off limits for some people in their remits, and that can obviously filter down. When you've had all those businesses you've worked for, where have you started to kind of assess the learning culture and then try to improve it before you even start thinking about the learning next?
Yeah, I think probably one of the biggest elements, and it goes back to my consultancy days, we'd go into clients and talk to senior teams, exec teams, C-suite, and they'd talk a lot about, can you help us fix them?
Yeah.
We're okay. Can you help us fix them? Which is the immediate red flag that there isn't a learning culture, because there isn't a recognition that actually we all need to get better. There's lots of different models around learning.
That's the next question, yeah.
Yeah, so, but, if you go down the route of 70-20-10, thinking about, the different approaches and kind of thinking around learning culture for me is, let's focus on the 70. So how do we help people think about learning every day? So let's forget about a course. Let's forget about a piece of coaching. Mm-hmm. Let's think about, okay, how are you creating an environment for your people where they're thinking about, well, what have I done today? What have I learned that's new? What have I shared with somebody else that might be interesting? And how can I integrate that into tomorrow so that I just get better? For me, it starts with managers and senior managers and execs talking about the small things.
Yeah.
It's easy to talk about programs of development or particular initiatives.
Yeah, because they're kind of they're over here in 100%. Some ways. Yeah.
So when you get organisations that it becomes a constant conversation where daily, weekly reflections, journaling is going on, so people are encouraged to really think about, well, what have you bumped into today? How did you deal with it? Okay, was that new? And how can you deliberately take that into tomorrow? That's where you start to see far better impact with your programme-related stuff.
Yeah. And we're both football fans for our sins.
We are.
Huddersfield fan, Newcastle fan.
And we didn't talk about sharing that though, did
we? But I'm going somewhere with this. So there's an analogy with kind of football and patience. So managers often don't get time in a football kind of context. Have you found in businesses there's always this learning every day is great, but when there's results or people are under pressure, can that get sacrificed or go out the window a little bit? Those principles.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, learning's all, in my experience, up until very, very recently, and it tends to be organisationally led. Learning is the first thing where time and resource is cut.
Yes.
So I've been made redundant 4 times in my career, which is a great example of actually we don't have budget for this anymore, or we're changing the way we work.
Yep.
And it comes full circle. So it's almost a not now. But again, I go back to what I just said. The not now stuff tends to be big programs, big investments, investment in LMS or online content. Actually, if you've got a culture, learning never stops, regardless of the conditions, whether it's economy related or business performance. You can still focus on learning because it's the small stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it disappears.
Why do you think that's the default? That people kind of...
It's easy.
It's easy. It's a quicker win almost, isn't it?
Short term, easy.
Yes.
Medium term to long term, there's a cost attached to it. So I've seen it in organisations where graduate programs were cut, and then dial it forward 3 years and conversation around we have no talent coming through.
Or succession planning, or there's nothing.
So you pay for it somewhere.
Yes, but it's just people are happy to take the short term.
Yeah, in that moment, it saves you some money off the bottom line, and that's fine as long as you're happy with the cost you pay later.
Yes. And what about managers, getting them involved as well? What's their role in this learning culture piece, do you think, or making things stick? Because again, they can have more task-driven agendas, and learning can be even further removed from that sometimes.
Yeah. The first thing is making everybody accountable for their own learning and growth. I think all too often in organisations, the responsibility for somebody else's development is put on the manager.
Yes.
And I don't subscribe to that, because the manager's there to create opportunities and to move blockers out of the way. But the person who's, if it was me as a team member, the person who's responsible for my development is me.
Yeah.
So actually a line manager supporting individuals to take that accountability and to go out and find pieces of learning, whether it's reading a blog or listening to a podcast or finding a piece of learning they can do for themselves, like on LinkedIn Learning or whatever it might be. Encouraging that helps drive that culture into the team.
Yeah.
If I go back to 70-20-10, then the 20 is all about coaching, and that's where a manager will play a much bigger part. So how are they spending time with their team members, asking them great questions? And I don't mean go and book a room for 90 minutes and we'll have a coaching session. What I mean is coaching conversations. You know, if you're in the office next to the water fountain, go, so what have you found today? What's been a challenge? How did you deal with it?
Yeah.
So managers being equipped to ask great coaching conversations is key.
Yeah.
And then when you go to the 10, so the input stuff, this is, for me, it's really simple. And I think what I've seen is lots of organisations try and make it complex.
Okay.
So again, when I was consulting, when I'd work with clients, we'd talk about 3 distinct areas that would need to be fulfilled in order for learning transfer to take place. The first is transfer motivation. So that's all about, are the people who are going to learn motivated to learn? Do they want to? Do they understand why?
I think that's the bit I'm really interested to get your opinion on as well, because that's something that I think is easy if someone's ambitious and they've got a map and you're kind of facilitating that as a manager, but it can be tricky if someone's not engaged or they just see it as a job.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you get people on that journey without them feeling that they're being railroaded
into
what you like doing, you know?
So I think when you come to a learner being motivated, for me, is it about developing skills that's going to help you grow your career? If yes, and you're driven career-wise, probably quite easy to get them bought in.
Yes, and that's why I find that a lot more comfortable.
Yeah.
But then there's the other bit. I'd love to get your...
Well, I think for me, there's also this... It's almost unspoken in businesses where what a business demands of an employee next year will be more than they expect of them this year. So from a development point of view, how does any individual need to grow and develop to improve their performance by 1%, by 2%?
Yeah.
Because the business will demand it. And if an individual doesn't grow and keep pace with what the organisation wants over time, over 3, 4, 5 years, they'll drift to a point to underperforming.
Yeah.
And, dealing with an underperformance situation is a far more complex, far more emotive scenario than actually encouraging colleagues to just keep pace. So this isn't about having to do a lot. It's about doing things regularly and consistently. So that's the 10%. That's the transfer motivation. You then have transfer design, and that is the thing that they're going to learn appropriate for what they need to do? So is the training environment right? Is the material right? If it was a piece of video arts content,
It's got
is
to
it
be
the
the
right
right-
video that provokes the right thing?
Absolutely. At the right time, the right person.
That's right.
So they don't log on and see loads of stuff that's irrelevant to them. That
That's right.
switches people off. You only got one chance to make a first
That's right.
impression, haven't you, basically?
Yeah, so you go, I'm up for it, but I'm now in a learning environment and it makes no sense to me, or I can't relate to it because I work in food manufacturing and the examples of financial services.
Yeah.
So it's got to be right. So the design of whatever it is has got to be spot on. And then the third area is around transfer environment, and that's what happens afterwards. And quite often, in my experience, nothing happens afterwards.
Which is about to say that this tends to be, I think, where a lot of companies get to. This last bit is the bit they tend to really struggle with, isn't it? I think, or can be the hardest bit because again, maybe people are time poor, they've not got a lot of time. You've persuaded people to invest in some training, a session, a program, but once it's done, it's done.
Yeah, that's right.
And then it can be hard to follow it up, can't it?
Wait, for me, what I see is that classic, oh, thank God you're back. We missed you yesterday. All the work stacked up. Can you just crack on? Which then devalues the fact they were out doing the learning, and it means they're not applying it from the first day back in their work environment. I see a lot of managers over the years where sending a colleague on training is almost like putting a car in for a service. So they send the car in, expect it to be fixed,
and then
it's shiny because it's had a service wash.
Yeah,
and then it comes out, and then they expect it to run perfectly forever, but actually forget that. Well, in a week it's going to be out of petrol. And it's going to be dirty. So unless you pay attention to it and clean it and refill it and top it up, it won't happen. It won't perform in the way it did when it came out. So for me, the transfer environment is, are you creating an opportunity for them to apply? Are you encouraging them to do that in a controlled way? Are you observing them to give them good feedback around what they're trying? Are you encouraging them to share what they've learned with their colleagues? Because one of the best ways you can make learning stick is to teach somebody else.
Yeah.
So that's all about the manager and the organisation believing in it enough that it's not just about what happens on the day or the number of days of the learning, it's what happens immediately after returning. And if that stuff doesn't happen, you get the reduction in knowledge retention, skill retention. It just disappears really, really quickly. Unless you've got an individual that truly owns it themselves.
Which is probably a bit rarer though, isn't it? It'd be great if that was the case, but that can be, especially you said you come back, and I think that will stick with a lot of people, the kind of stuff you mentioned about you're back, oh great, all this stuff happened when you were away.
That's right.
And then you're back into survival mode basically, and it's kind of forgotten about, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's baking that in from the start.
That's
if we're going to do this program, it needs to be more important is actually the bit afterwards as well, rather than just
the learning experience is fine. It's input.
Yeah.
And you can have average input and great implementation and transfer of learning if the environment's right. If you've got world-class input, but the environment's wrong afterwards, the impact won't be there. You won't see the impact on the individual, the team, or the business. So, when I thought about building relationships with clients, it was, well, let me help you get them motivated. So how do we engage people beforehand? If we've done our job properly, we'll create the right content with the right language because we've done our due diligence and we'll get that right. And then the environment stuff is all on you. So from a consulting point of view, it's let's not talk in 12 months' time around that program didn't work, because actually there's ways to avoid that. And so many organizations will send people on similar training. Go, oh, program with X provider didn't work. And 12 months later, well, we've got somebody new, and they do something that's 80% the same.
Yes, it's a fresh kind
We've done this before.
Look and feel, but yeah.
Well, okay, so if you've done it before, the content was right. So something else was wrong.
Yeah, and why is it we kind of back here?
The easy thing is to invest more time in the content, either with another provider or with your internal resource,
rather than changing the way it's actually implemented.
Well, the harder thing is to look at yourself and go, what didn't we do?
Yeah. And that's the questions people should be asking, shouldn't they?
Yeah.
So obviously we've got 70, 20, 10.
Yeah.
Is there any other models that you kind of look on? Just your experience, that quite handy for people who are maybe starting out to look at this stuff that you lean on or reference, or that's obviously a really, really big one.
Yeah, I'm not the most theoretical of L&D practitioner, so you won't see me quoting lots and lots of models and theories. I tend to be quite pragmatic in my outlook. So probably not. What I would encourage people to think about is to go back and do some reviews of two things. One, what is our organisational culture like?
Yeah.
How do we talk about learning? And is it an everyday conversation or an occasional conversation? And if it's occasional, how do you shift it to every day?
Yeah.
So what are the blockers to that? To start to diagnose what's getting in the way. So as an L&D practitioner in an organisation, almost operating with a consultant mindset and go, where are the blockers? What do I need to free up in order for this to become more possible? The other thing I would encourage people to do is when we do on-program stuff, so whether it's a piece of e-learning, the exciting compliance modules that everybody loves doing, or a piece of leadership development, to really think about, well, who's engaged with, who are the stakeholders, because the learner is only one. So there's a bit of contracting going on here around with the line manager, with the learner, with potentially senior managers around actually their commitment to it. So things I've seen work really well is where you get senior managers committed to coming and talking at each module on a program and talk about their experience, because that visibly demonstrates their commitment to it.
It's more relatable as well, isn't it? Because then that's where you get your champions from, which will kind of filter through. Yeah.
So I think you've got that side of things, and then maybe a third is starting to think about, well, where are your examples of best practice in your organisation already? Because they'll be there. And start to shine a light on it and show what a difference it can make when people do things really well.
Yeah, nice.
And more people will jump on board with that. So almost creating a bit of a community, social view on learning and sharing.
Yeah, especially as managers, that sets a nice tone, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point it's anyone. I would almost take, regardless of role, if they're excited and energised around learning, I almost don't care what their job is, because their voice will be powerful because they believe in it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, what models, I've not really answered your question. I don't think it's about models. I think it's around going and lifting lots of stones up and saying, well, what's working and what's not.
I think that's a really good practical tip people can take back. And then pitfalls. So I'm going to mention the dreaded LMS.
Okay.
I'm not sure I've come across anyone who loves the LMS. I mean, it's an ongoing joke we have in our team. We speak to people, they're looking for content or whatever.
Yeah.
I think only 3 or 4 people in the 10 years I've worked in L&D have said, I've got a fantastic LMS that's working really well. Everyone's logging on. Back to pitfalls. Do you think there's a problem when you start putting stuff on LMS? Obviously, in our world, it's really important, but end users, how bothered are they with a learning platform? That can be a bit of a problem. I think that's where you talk about things kind of going wrong. What do you...
Yeah, so pitfalls. I think there's almost a misconception with LMSs as a quick fix. So we can put online digital content.
Stick it on there.
Easy, it's there.
Yeah.
Fine. Well, you can spend a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of resource putting content on an LMS that nobody ever looks at. So you go back to those principles of design, motivation, and environment. Well, you could have the best design content in the world, but if people aren't motivated to even open it and look at it, it's a waste of time. Why bother? So the LMS for me is almost a bit of a red herring.
Yeah.
So for me, it's what is the...
It's one tool, isn't it? And that's
it's a tool. It's a way to engage with learning.
Yeah.
But I would look at the demographics of your organisation. So I've worked with some that are, in contact centres. Everybody's online. Everybody's got access to technology.
Yeah.
So an LMS, online learning, is fine as a vehicle for delivery, as long as those other conditions are met.
Yeah.
But I've worked for other organisations. When I worked for Northern Foods, we had 10,000 colleagues in the UK, of which around 7,000 were factory workers who had zero access to. And
that was the thing I was going to ask you about is how do you then, it is that if that's just kind of a tool, how do you get that learning coach and things being standardised when you've got all these different generations, especially after COVID, a lot more homeworking. Again, you've got factories and different types of job. Not everyone's got access to internet even.
That's right.
How do you then get a consistent learning coach or make something stick when you've got all those challenges? Because that's something I think every L&D practitioner will face.
So the first thing is, what are the outcomes? What do we want to be different as a result of this thing we're going to do?
Yeah.
And why? So is it something that's to improve the business? Is it something that's keeping us legal and safe?
Yeah.
Or is it anything else? But if we're clear on the outcomes, then we can say, okay, so what is an appropriate way to achieve those outcomes in X context? So if you're, a team of individuals working in a factory on a production line, well, actually, is it then about taking them in smaller groups and doing some face-to-face pieces of learning? If somebody's in a head office context, then you may say online, but equally you might say, well, the most appropriate way to achieve those outcomes is to get them face-to-face too. So I think it's all outcome-led. And that's where, for me, that's where you get your hook into senior managers, getting them to articulate, so what needs to be different? Well, how will we
What's the
know?
outcome?
What are you
Yeah.
going to see?
Yeah.
So you understand the why. Then you can design all your learning and your methodology around that. But there is no silver bullet with that. It's
No.
looking at
Makes
your
sense.
demographics of your organisation and what is appropriate. I think the big challenge for L&D practitioners is creating choice.
Yeah.
So almost rather than in the past, if I go back to my O2 days, yes, we had some online, but most of it was face-to-face. It was easy because everything was delivered in the same way. Whereas now you might need to find the same content and deliver it in 3 or 4 different methods to meet a broader audience. So, I think it's quite challenging to think about that. But if you don't think about that, then people will get missed.
Yeah.
And you won't have the impact that you want.
Yeah. And what about kind of marketing this stuff? Have you found that's tricky? I mean, for instance, some companies we've come across where they've, from above, they said, oh, we need to do some mental health training.
Mm-hmm.
Often this push comes from something bad's happened, or they feel they should be doing it. It's not, trying to phrase it, not like a totally organic or genuine desire. They just almost want to say we should be doing that, so do a program on that and that'll be that. Is that something that's a problem as well in making this stuff stick? Because then it's already coming across a bit of a weak thing, and you're just implementing something you've been told to do rather than it being, we're really going to prioritise this, and as you said before, make this part of a daily habit.
Yeah, and I'll go back to something I said early on. So this back to when I was consulting, it's can you fix them?
Yeah.
Because we're okay.
Yes.
So you invest time in colleagues who are maybe more junior to an executive team, and what that shows is actually there isn't a real commitment to it. So the only way, in my experience, of really showcasing this is for the leaders to go first.
Nice.
So to live it. So if mental health training is the right thing, well, where are the opportunities for those senior leaders, board level leadership teams to be talking about this stuff, to be talking about their own challenges? Now, that might be a challenge around vulnerability, but it's not one we should shy away from, because actually if we're expecting other people to be open and thinking about mental health and thinking about, whatever the topic is, but you raise mental health, thinking about, I'm going to share and I'm going to help support people with that. Well, they have to go first, because if they don't, they do not create role modeling and creating an environment that encourages everybody else to go. So, for me, the message for me to leaders out there is support your L&D teams. You have to make yourself available. You have to go first. It's got to be in your language patterns, because if you're expecting it to be in other people's, it's got to be in yours. If it's not in yours, forget it. It'll die.
I think we've got lots of top tips there. I'm making notes myself, which has been great. We always recap or finish an episode with our live and learn example.
Okay.
Obviously being video arts. Have you got a funny anecdote of maybe learning that hasn't stuck, or that you were maybe on a program at some point that was done really badly, or a lesson you've learned, or anything like that?
So probably a couple if I can. So I'm not going to share the organisations because I don't think that's fair.
Yeah.
So I was on a talent programme going back a number of years.
Yep.
This will probably give it away for those that know, but the programme internally was known as the Futures Programme. So it was people who were identified with capability, with talent to progress to more senior roles.
Yep.
The learning was fantastic. You got coaching from a university coach. So it
Fantastic,
was it was super.
It's all sounded very good so far.
All very good. All very good. But did the learning stick? It did for me, but not for the organisation, because the conditions that were created around it was then a raised expectation around, okay, you've equipped me now, so where's this new role? So externally, internally with participants, the programme wasn't known as the Futures Programme, it was known as the Levers Programme, because 90% of those colleagues who went through it ended up with more senior jobs, but just not at the organisation we were working in.
So was it mapped on succession planning, or
No. So there wasn't that connection to say, actually, if we do this, are we creating a problem for ourselves?
Interesting.
And I'm going back a long time in my career there, but that's always been really mindful around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, you can overdo succession. So that was one. And then I think programs that haven't worked. I kind of talked about it earlier from my consultancy days. The number of times we've gone in, or we went in to hear, well, we've done a program like this before, it didn't work, so we'd like you to do it. And actually then the tough conversations we used to have with the board meant at times we lost work. Because what I refused to do was for my organisation to be the next one that labelled their program didn't work.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
So not funny, but anecdotal there is actually a bravery around challenging those senior leaders, because without that, you're destined for failure.
And what would your final top tip be for people who maybe that's not their comfort zone, challenging, especially senior leaders? Not everyone's comfortable or got experience.
Get that.
How did you start that? Is that just your DNA, or is that something you've worked on? Or yeah, because that's something you're really strong at. So people who want to bottle some of that skill you've got, what would your kind of tip be on
See,
that?
I'm not sure it's skill. It's just a bit of bravery. Just jump. You might not articulate it in the right way. As long as you're respectful,
Yeah.
I think it's hard for an executive leader to come back at you negatively when what you're trying to do is improve the business. So I think Will Smith talks about, are you scared? Yes, we'll do it scared.
Yeah.
Just do it, because actually if you don't, you'll regret it later, and it'll reflect on you, because you end up delivering programs
And you'll be
that don't land.
responsible anyway. So again, it's back to that short-termism, isn't it? You're better
Yeah.
off just doing it now.
Yeah. And it's
Fantastic.
never as bad as you think.
That is also true, isn't it?
Yeah.
You always catastrophize in your head. You think,
Yeah,
God,
it's never as bad as you
I'm going to
think.
get fired or whatever, and it's not.
They might have a different opinion, and that's fine. It's their business. But ultimately,
But then you've
you've
said
done the right thing.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I've loved having you on. Thank you. It's been really good
No,
fun.
great to
Got some
chat.
fantastic tips, I think, to share with everybody, and hopefully you can come back on soon. But thanks so much for your time and expertise.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you.